Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks so much for being here. This is such an important line, and I've had to hear it like 100 times before I could like visualize it properly. Whoever controls the present controls the past. So whoever controls the present controls the past. Whoever controls the past controls the future. All right, so you can visualize the timeline. Whoever controls the present controls the past. Whoever controls the past controls the future. George Orwell wrote that in 1984. The main character in this dystopian future book works at the records department at the government office Ministry of Truth, where his job was to literally rewrite the past to conform to whatever the government wants it to be in the present and future. See, like that, see how that works? His job was literally to rewrite the past. In real life, Joe Biden's State Department has erased the term Abraham Accords. You will never hear the Biden administration ever use the term Abraham Accords. Why? Because these were, without question, the greatest diplomatic achievement of the Trump administration and really of the last X number of decades. And the Biden administration, the left progressives, cannot let anything good come out of the Trump administration ever. So it disappeared it. They made it disappear. They control the present, so now they are controlling the past. And if you can control the past, you can control the future. The Abraham Accords are peace deals between Israel and United Arab Emirates and Israel and Bahrain, and there were more coming. But, Trump's tweets are so mean. I can't vote for Trump, he's so mean. So people voted for Biden, and the peace deal stopped. And Israel and the Palestinians popped off and all of it, right? And now the name is gone, Abraham Accords. They're now called merely normalization agreements. That's all it was. They weren't this big, grand, historic Abraham Accords branded as this big historical thing. They're just little normalization agreements. There can't be a hint of triumph or accomplishment or anything newsworthy, noteworthy, or historic that ever came out of the Trump administration. They will never let it happen. And they've memory hold it because they control the present, so they're rewriting the past. Trump derangement syndrome is forever. Or at least until DeSantis runs for president officially. And then DeSantis will be even worse than Trump, right? But at least Trump derangement syndrome is for the next 4 years. Last weekend, Trump gave a speech in North Carolina. And this was the main headline, the first headline I saw about his speech. He said that these people who came up with critical race theory, they came from hell. And I thought, whoa, that's a line, right? That's the big headline, right? These people who came up with critical race theory, they came from hell. So it's like, I want to hear that clip. I want to hear him say that. I want to hear the reaction. I want to play it on the show here. So I went back and I found it. And here's the moment.
They want to take away your guns, and I said it before the election, and I say it after the election. The Biden administration has also issued regulations to indoctrinate America's school children with poisonous and divisive left-wing doctrines, such as critical race theory, and exact opposite of the American belief that we all are created equal in the holy image of God. We have a group of people, I don't know where they come from, but it's terrible.
The transcript says, I don't know where they came from. It's hell, I think. That was the transcript. That was the headline. That was the freak out. That was the outrage. They come from hell. He didn't say that. Listen to just that last part again. I'll tell you now, because once you hear it, guys, can we play it twice actually before I say what he actually said? Play it. Let's do that last part again and listen to what he really said.
We have a group of people, I don't know where they come from, but it's terrible.
He said, I don't know where they came from, but it's terrible. Not it's hell, I think, but it's terrible. One last time, and now that I said it's terrible, you'll hear it very clearly.
We have a group of people, I don't know where they come from, but it's terrible.
Trump derangement syndrome can make you hear things. And now it's put in the record, and the record will never be changed. So let's get dramatic here. Where does this end? Give me an example. June 5th, just the other day, was the anniversary of what happened in 1989 and the Tiananmen Square massacre. Tiananmen Square protest, it was 2 months of protests in Tiananmen Square. Finally, on June 5th, it was actually before that, but June 5th was the end of the crackdown. But the government came in and killed everyone. The estimates are they killed around 500 people, injured many, many more. But this was really like a major crackdown on all freedom in China, the Tiananmen Square massacre. Now, we've all seen Tank Man, right? This is the famous image of that moment. You got this guy standing in front of the row of tanks, right? Well, last weekend, if you went on Microsoft's Bing, which who does that? But there are people who do that. And you Binged, searched for Tank Man, it came back this. No images found. Are you kidding me? I will search for the most obscure thing and it'll come back with like 599 million results in 0.4 seconds. But with Tank Man, nothing. Nothing. No images. Now, Microsoft came back and says that this was human error. Human error. Human error? That's a weird human error. Here's what they mean by that. In China, it wasn't an error. You can't search for Tank Man in China. Maybe the human error was making that censored for everyone else around the world too, right? Like that was the human error. But the initial censorship in China, that wasn't an error. And if that's not a wake-up call of how much power these big tech companies have, I don't know how to wake someone up to that point. Because that type of censorship, like that's a dramatic example, right? Like no results. But that type of censorship happens all the time. These search engines, these tech companies in San Francisco, by the way, I'm not calling it Silicon Valley anymore. Silicon Valley is too vague, it's too nebulous, it's too whatever. San Francisco. These tech companies in San Francisco with the worldview that is completely contrary and antithetical to yours, they have way too much power over your perception of reality, what you do see and what you don't see. And that is why we all have to be actively searching for the truth and actively searching for what really matters, because you're being fed a bunch of stuff that doesn't. And we got to look for what really happened. I mean, even that's why I share that example with Trump. Like that's such a basic one. Like the words he said. It's not even like when Trump did the Charlottesville hoax, right? Where Trump is like, oh, they're very fine people on both sides. And you got to kind of go back to the words and kind of parse what he meant. And there's a disagreement on what he meant versus what he... No, this is, what are the words he said? They get that wrong. We got to go back and find the truth always. Last point on Tiananmen Square. Roger Kimball told the story of a while back, his kid had a foreign exchange student from China at his kid's school. And the kid from China came over to their house for dinner or whatever. Nice kid. He wasn't like a communist diehard ideologue, but did not believe that the Tiananmen Square massacre happened. Did not like, no, that's not a thing. That didn't happen. I got video. I'll show you. No, it's like a movie. That didn't happen. Wow, isn't that amazing? That's the depth of how people can be brainwashed. That's the depth of derangement's potential. It's like, oh yeah, that thing, nope. And it's what people can think and it's how people can act. I came across this video the other day of Kim Jong-un in North Korea walking into a meeting. Check this out.
조선민주주의인민공화국 국무위원장이신 경애하는 김정은 동지께서 회의를 사비하셨습니다.
You can't. It's hard to tell if that was Kim Jong-un's sycophants applauding, please don't kill me, please don't kill me, please don't kill me, or the Washington press corps, oh, please like me, please like me. I read this morning, I didn't click the link, but someone asked Kamala a question and said, I voted for you. Like, what? Has that ever happened, ever? There's no difference between Kim Jong-un's press corps and the Washington press corps. Maybe a little different motive, right? Don't kill me versus please like me, but still in the end, it's the same type of sycophantic, oh, Kamala. No concern for the truth. That's the important part. I love this line. This is from Samuel Johnson. Guys, did you guys get a picture of Samuel Johnson? Because Samuel Johnson, he's a meme. Yeah, that guy's a meme, but he's a real guy who had smart things to say. But you've maybe seen that meme before. He was a British writer. This is from 1825. He said, accustom your children constantly to this. If a thing happened at one window, and they, when relating it, when talking about it, say that it happened at another, do not let that pass. Instantly check them. You do not know where deviation from truth will end. Oh, come on now. So it's like a little thing, like your kid says, oh, it happened over here, but it really happened over here. Correct them on that. Son, it didn't happen over here, it happened over here. Correct them, because you don't know where the deviation from truth will end, whether on that situation or in any other situation in the rest of their lives moving forward. And I'll give you an example of where it ends. For 30 years, people have gathered in Hong Kong. Victoria Park is the name of this park, to have a candlelight vigil for the victims of the Tiananmen Square massacre. And there'd be tens of thousands of people there. Now that Hong Kong is owned by the Chinese, and now that they've really been cracking down on Hong Kong, no more vigil. You can see those are all pictures from previous years at these candlelight vigils, and that one in the bottom right was this weekend. No more memorial service. Didn't happen. Why did the memorial service not happen? Well, there was nothing to memorialize. There was no Tiananmen Square massacre. What do you mean? Well, you control the present, you control the past. And if you control the past, you control the future. And that's where the deviation from truth ultimately ends. Yourself, personally, don't memory hole the fear and the panic that people felt a year or so ago at the very beginning of this pandemic. Try to go back and remember what that was like. It wasn't just like the comical people freaking out for toilet paper. It was more than that. Lines around the block at Costco and every grocery store. People standing in line like chumps. Maybe that's a little strong. People standing in line realizing, not wanting to admit, but realizing how unprepared they were. And it's so easy to be prepared, which is what, right? If you asked any one of those people waiting in line to get into a store where there was no food, and especially if things were a tad more desperate, because when things get desperate, they get dangerous really, really fast. But if you ask any one of those people in line, hey, listen, for this much money, you get My Patriot Supply. You get a 4-week supply of food from My Patriot Supply. Every single person in line would pay any amount of money to get out of that line, go home, and be safe. And you can just do it now. The best way to make sure that you not only survive, but thrive during the next natural disaster or whatever is to get an emergency stockpile of food from My Patriot Supply. And you can't serve others, you can't help others if you don't have food yourself, if you're dependent on other people. Right? So get what you need now, obviously, before the next crash or disaster or panic. My Patriot Supply, they're the best. Millions of families, over a decade, 39,000 4- and 5-star reviews, 2,000 calorie meals. No one else comes close to that. And you get 25% off their 4-week emergency food kit, depending on how many people you have in your family. This is what you need. Just get the 4 weeks and then you're done. It's good for 25 years, so you're done for 25 years. 25% off. We got a special website for you, preparewiththefirst.com in order to get that deal. Preparewiththefirst.com. Coming up next, we'll talk about how wokeism has infiltrated medicine, med schools, hospitals, insurance companies. This is now a matter of life or death. We'll do that next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. In this segment, I want to talk about the point of critical race theory. What is the ultimate goal of the people who are pushing this? It's twofold, more long-term and a short-term. The long-term is the end of capitalism. The point of it is to tear down capitalism And the shorter term is reparations. It's reparations and tear down capitalism. That's it. End of story. In a second, I know that it's Marxism, right? I'll prove in a second that with a clip from the founder of Black Lives Matter explaining why she's a Marxist. I know like this sounds like such a bold claim, but it's not. I'll prove it to you here in just a minute. Let me first focus on the reparations here. So California has a reparations committee, right? It's a reparations committee. And here are the things that they're coming up with so far. First, they're going to apologize to Black Californians for slavery. Now, I got some questions. First of all, slavery was never legal in California. It's the first. Second, do recent immigrants from Africa count? Are they going to be apologized to as well? So if you moved from Nigeria last year into California, are you going to be apologized to? What if you've been here for a long time, you're Black, you've been here for a long time, but your descendants are from Jamaica, or you're descended from slaves in Jamaica, so you weren't enslaved by Americans? Are we still going to apologize to you? So is this just like an apology on behalf of all white people to all Black people? Or is it just an apology on behalf of slave owners to people defend, or of course there's no slave owners, so people descended from slave owners apologizing to only people descended of slaves who were owned by America? Like, how's that work? What if you're white and you are a descendant of a white person who was a slave to someone in the Middle East? Do you, like, are you apologized to, or are we only apologizing to Black people descended of Black slaves, right? Now, is this apology on behalf of only white people, or is this an apology on behalf of, let's say, Muslims who are descendants of people who enslaved even more Black people than the Atlantic slave trade? So, right, so like, I got a lot of questions here about the apology that's being drafted. Another idea is free college for Black people in the Cal State or University of California system. Another idea is 0 down payments for first-time Black homeowners, no down payment for a home. And the state will pay for 45% of the price of a home, which they say will cut the price of a home in half. Because they're total idiots. In reality, it will double the price of homes. Have we learned nothing from the price of college? When government swoops in trying to make something more affordable, it only ends up getting more expensive, and the same thing would happen with housing. But these are the ideas around reparations right now. And that's the short-term goal. And they're gonna get it. They're gonna get something, right? It's gonna get more and more and more. But on this journey, there's many victims along the way. The goal ultimately is to infiltrate and destroy every institution that exists in America. Coming up on Friday, we're gonna do our special about woke capitalism. It's called The Woke of Wall Street. And we're gonna start off with this author who's amazing. And he so clearly defines and articulates the march through the institutions and how big business was the last domino to fall, and how this is the purpose of this is to destroy capitalism. That's the ultimate goal. The objective of woke activists is to infiltrate every institution and destroy it. That's it. Now, it's hard for you to accept that because you're a good person. You're a good person who would never think of doing such a thing. It doesn't even register. Like, what are you talking about? Like, why would someone want to do that? Well, you have psychological reasons. Hurt people, right? We've all seen in our lives how people try to tear down other people, right? So there's a psychological reason behind it. But they're Marxists. And this is what Marxists do. This is the founder of Black Lives Matter, Patrisse Cullors.
I need to set the record straight. Am I a Marxist? I do believe in Marxism. It's a philosophy that I learned really early on because the US is so good at propaganda and being like, it has sold the idea of the American dream, and that's tied into capitalism and wealth. It's much harder to sell communism.
I don't know what you want me to, like, what do I have to prove? What do I have to play? What do I have to show someone for them to know that these Black Lives Matter activist leaders are Marxists? And that Black Lives Matter has been probably the single most effective marketing ever. Like, no social movement's been embraced by big business, certainly, and K through 12 and higher education than Black Lives Matter has so quickly. They're Marxists. I think I said, oh, wow, that's a little harsh. I just played the founder saying I'm a Marxist. Now, like a good communist, they take over everything, and they destroy it from within. In this segment, I want to talk about medicine. Now, we all know K through 12, we all know higher education, and now they've taken over K through 12. We get that. But it's also taken over medicine. Critical race theory is destroying medicine in front of our eyes. It's already been infiltrated. Dr. Cohen, this is in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2019, Racist Like Me, a call to self-reflection and action for white physicians. She literally starts out her article with, I am a racist. Right? Now, critical race theory, everything is about race, and then everything is interconnected with everything all the time. This is a doctor at UC San Francisco. In the US, blacks have higher deaths from heart disease. Okay, so it's a medical issue, right? You would too if traumatized by police violence. Oh, geez. This ongoing stress is killing black, brown, and indigenous people over centuries. It's time to decolonize, #defund the police, right? You see how it's all connected, and it's all race. So instead of looking at cultural issues or medical issues, differences between different cultures and foods they eat, which would then lead to heart disease, or amount of exercise done, which would then lead to higher rates of heart disease. Instead of looking at that, it's, oh, no, we got to look at it through an intersectional racist lens. It's the police who are killing black people. And that's causing stress. That's right. See how that works? That's a critical consciousness. You got to look at everything through a racial lens. There have been cancellations in the medical field. Here's one story. Dr. Norman Wang. He was a doctor at Pittsburgh Medical Center. He's written in many, many journals over the years. I think it was 2018 and 2019, he had the 2 most downloaded medical papers that appeared in medical journals in the country, right? So super prolific, quoted doctor in the medical field, right? In the journal from the American Heart Association, he agreed with a Supreme Court decision that affirmative action should end by 2028 and that we should instead accept medical students based on merit, not on race. Here is one thing he said. He said, long-term academic solutions and excellence should not be sacrificed for short-term demographic optics. Ultimately, all who aspire to a profession in medicine and cardiology must be assessed as individuals on the basis of their personal merits, not their racial and ethnic identities. Okay? That is like so common sense. I don't know who, you can pretend that you disagree with that, but when it comes down to it and you need heart surgery, who do you want? You want the best doctor? Or do you're with me? So he wrote that in this journal. One med school student with 14,000 followers on Twitter said, oh, here's this Dr. Wang who said black people are unfit to be doctors. Can you believe it? What a racist out there who doesn't think people of color are able to be doctors, which isn't what he said at all. But she tweeted that out to her followers. Then the director of diversity and inclusion at the Mayo Clinic took that person's tweet and piled on. All these complaints came in against the doctor. One of the complaints was he did not capitalize the letter B in black. So the medical journal took down his paper, and the University of Pittsburgh fired him from his position. And he's now suing them. Good. So the cancellations happen, just like we see in entertainment and everything else. Cancellations are happening even in the med field for common sense, basic statements like that. Okay, back to today. This is right after COVID. So remember the whole thing with doctors, like don't go anywhere, doctors and nurses, like don't go anywhere, stay inside, miss funerals, birthdays, graduation, school, sports, everything, right? And then Black Lives Matter protests hit, and all these nurses are outside applauding and everything, right? So this is an open letter signed by hundreds of doctors. White supremacy is a lethal public health issue that predates and contributes to COVID-19. COVID-19 among black patients is yet another lethal manifestation of white supremacy. In addressing demonstrations against white supremacy, the Black Lives Matter protest, our first statement must be one of unwavering support for those who would dismantle, uproot, or reform racist institutions. Dismantle, that's what I talk about. Like they say dismantle, disrupt, and disturb. No, dismantle, disrupt, Dismantle, I always forget the third. Dismantle, disrupt, deconstruct. All right, those are the 3 Ds. Dismantle, disrupt, and deconstruct. I say destroy. That's all those 3 things really mean. Destroy what? Well, racist institutions. Racist institutions like what? Medicine. I could do this all day. Let me wrap it up. Yeah, I'll give you just a bunch of examples here. Yale School of Medicine. All first-year med students have to take a course called Making the Invisible Visible: Art, Identities, and Hierarchies of Power. Because everything's through that lens of hierarchies of power. Berkeley has an Institute for Healing and Justice in Medicine and the Freedom School for Intersectional Medicine and Health Justice. Harvard Med School, racism is inherent to every aspect of our lives. It's woven into the fabric of society. Therefore, the absence of conspicuous racist actions is not enough. We must be actively anti-racist. The CDC has a page called Health, Equity, Racism, and Health. Blue Cross Blue Shield has a new anti-racism, health equity, diversity, inclusion, equity strategy. You with me? It's infiltrated med schools, it's infiltrated hospitals, it's infiltrated insurance companies. The wonderful Barry Weiss, she said, I always thought that if you lived through a revolution, it would be obvious to everyone. Right? How could you miss it? But it turns out that's not true. Revolutions can be bloodless, incremental, and subtle. And they don't require a strongman. They just require a sufficient number of well-positioned true believers and cowards. The woke takeover of medicine, it's literally life and death. And the woke are choosing woke over truth. And in the end, over life. Liz Wheeler, coming up next. Mike Slater, True Story. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. Our friend Chris Rufo has been one of the most vocal, not defenders, opposite defenders, attackers on critical race theory. He's been absolutely fantastic. He was on Mark Lamont Hill's show the other day, and here's the question that Hill asked Rufo.
And if I were to say to you right now, Christopher, what do you like about being white? What would you say?
I don't know. Again, it's such an amorphous term. It's like a census term or a
but can you do me a favor? Indulge me. Indulge me for one. We're running out of time. Indulge me for a minute. I understand you see it as all these things, but you surely recognize that the world sees you as white. The world reads you as white. And if you were to ask me some things I like about being black, I could talk about cultural norms, I could talk about tradition, I could talk about the kind of commonalities I feel around the diaspora. If I were to ask you particularly if you're saying whiteness is a thing that is being constructed as negative and shouldn't be, name something positive that you like about being white.
Amazing. Liz Wheeler's here from the Liz Wheeler Show, LizWheelerShow.com. She also has a wonderful locals account as well, so you can be a part of her community there. Liz Wheeler, how are you?
Mike, I'm good. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome to talk to you. I think Chris Rufo did as good of a job as one could do on the spot answering that ridiculous question. How would you answer that to Mark Lamont Hill?
Sure, I agree. Chris Rufo, a friend of mine, did a fabulous job. It was a trick question. It wasn't a question asked in good faith. And Chris Rufo answered that he should be identified by his individual characteristics, basically MLK's content of character versus color of my skin. So he did a wonderful job. Kudos to him. How would I answer that question? I would say, well, what I like about being white, I like being white because that's the way that God made me in God's image. Just like Mark Lamont Hill should like being black because that's the way God made him in God's image. That's actually why there can be no racial superiority or inferiority, because we're all made in God's image and there's nothing inferior or superior about different aspects of the way that God made us. So, I mean, it just comes back to, it's not just political correctness anymore. It's not just wokeness anymore. This is critical race theory. You've talked about this a lot. I talk about this a lot. I did an episode of my show recently talking about the history of critical race theory, but it's actually more than just the racism of viewing everyone through the prism of their skin color, reducing everyone to the amount of melanin in their skin. It's actually a tactic critical race theory is. It's not a theory at all. It's a tactic to impose Marxism on the United States. And I know that sounds like a wild claim, but I traced it back to the founders, the architects of critical race theory, critical theory actually, which is the grandfather, and we can get into that if you want. And what I found was fascinating.
Yeah. It's amazing that people who don't want to accept this, and I understand, just as you said, it's like, well, that's a bold claim, but we just played 4 minutes ago a clip of Patrisse Cullors, the founder of Black Lives Matter, talking about how she's a Marxist and we need to take down capitalism. So I don't know what else one would need to show to prove that these people are Marxists and this is all just a front cover for their ultimate end goals. Give us something that we've maybe never heard before, some people in past or the founding of all this that proves this point as well.
Sure. So Black Lives Matter are actually practitioners of critical race theory. They didn't originate it. They are just putting this into practice. This has actually been, believe it or not, almost 100 years in the making. So critical theory, which is the grandfather of critical race theory, was actually created by a group of Marxists at the Frankfurt School in Germany in the 1930s. Okay? So critical teaches that everybody should be viewed through the prism of race, not just everybody, but everything should be viewed through the prism of race, and that there is no objective truth. Instead of objective truth, there's just competing political narratives. Okay? So critical theory then teaches that Karl Marx's vision of a worker-led revolution, where the workers revolt against the elite, that wasn't going to happen because the workers weren't revolting. And we did see that. That was empirically true based on history. So they identified a different demographic. They realized they needed a new vanguard to spark their revolution. And so they chose racial minorities. Now, I'm skipping a few steps here, a few details that I go into great detail in my episode of my podcast. But in a nutshell, they said, we're going to use racial minorities as this vanguard to undermine institutions that we will paint as racist just based on looking at everything through the prism of race and telling people that there's no objective truth. And once we tear down these institutions, once we delegitimize them, they will fall and we will impose Marxism on the American people. Now, this poisonous ideology, obviously it's just textbook Marxism inserted with racialism, essentially. This was imported to the United States from Germany because these very Marxists escaped Nazi rule and found refuge at Columbia University, and thus critical race theory in the United States was born.
It's so clear, it's so obvious, and so many people, refuse to see it, don't see it, haven't heard you and I talk about it. I think people are starting to see it more in our schools, right? And people are starting to wake up.
Yeah.
How do you suggest one spread the word, and particularly in their kids' school? Because you know what happens, right? Someone goes up at a school board meeting or whatever and says, oh, this is Marxism, and everyone rolls their eyes, and it's like, oh, you're being dramatic, you're way over the top. We're just teaching kids to be nice, Liz. We're just teaching kids to understand and be kind to others. This isn't a Marxist takeover. What's your response there?
So first of all, this is a kind of a funny story. Yesterday in my town was election day, and I voted like a good citizen, of course. In the election, there was a school board election, and when I was walking out of the polls, I happened to see the two school board candidates standing out there, and they weren't talking to any voters at the time, so I thought to myself, why not engage in a little discussion? So I walked over to them, and I was like, hi, you're the school board candidates, aren't you? And they were like, yes. And I was like, what do you think of critical race theory? Do you support it or oppose it? Now, I knew what they thought, but I wanted to hear their answers. And they were very, I would say, deferential. One of them was like, well, I think it's important to recognize, the not so good parts of American history. It's really a scholarly pursuit. And I was like, well, do you think it's racist? And she's like, I don't know about that. And I was like, do you know what the roots are? Do you know where it came from? Do you know who the architect was? Do you know how it's applied in the curriculum in this town? And they couldn't answer this question, right? So the first thing, the lesson from this is, first of all, it's just fun to engage with politicians at any time that you possibly have the opportunity. But second of all, make sure you know what you're talking about, because parents don't want their children taught racism or racialism or revisionist history or Marxism. We've seen that in these uprisings of parents when they see the curriculum that's being fed to their children in schools. They don't want that being fed. So talk about it. Educate yourself as much as you possibly can. I'd encourage your state legislatures, and when I say encourage, say, if you don't pass a bill that prohibits critical race theory, then we will remove you from office. We will vote you out. And then hedge your bets and make sure that you pass school choice in your state. Because if there's school choice, if you have a voucher, an amount of money that goes with your child, and the school that your child is going to teaches critical race theory, and they're not responding to parents saying, hey, we don't want our kids learning this, then you can remove your child and their money from that school and send your child to another school that's not teaching critical race theory. And it works like a market, right? That school is either forced to adjust their curriculum or they'll close down.
You used to live in California, and I'm stuck here now. And now ethnic studies is a graduation requirement. And it's a mess. And they're pretty sneaky about it, though, right? They're very good with their jargon and the curriculum they release. And once you look at what actually goes on in the classroom, it's a whole new ballgame. But they're going to keep pushing this, right? And what's the end? What's the end of all this if we don't rise up against it?
Well, certainly the end is Marxism, right? That's their goal. They admit it. Any group that's practicing critical race theory like Black Lives Matter admits it. Critical race theory, critical legal studies, which is the father of critical race theory, and then critical theory, which is the grandfather of critical race theory, all openly admit. I was surprised, actually, when I was researching this. I thought I'd have to infer things from their writing and draw conclusions myself, and I didn't. They admit that their goal is Marxism and that they're exploiting racial minorities as a tool to try to divide the country, to delegitimize institutions, to tear them down, to impose Marxism. So if we don't stop it, Marxism is going to be what's happening. But I don't believe that we will get there. I believe that those thinking Americans, which are not just conservatives and Republicans, they're everyday common sense liberals and Democrats, too, who don't want their kids indoctrinated, who want the United States to be a free nation. They don't want Marxism, who are standing up and saying, stop this. We don't want this. Get this out of our schools. Get this out of our corporations. That's why in the last year alone, we've seen, I think it's over 20 states now, that have at least introduced bills, if not passed them into law, banning critical race theory from public schools.
The Liz Wheeler, LizWheelerShow.com to find all the podcasts. What is that podcast numbered specifically or called specifically so people can find that for you?
The Liz Wheeler Show. It's called The Liz Wheeler Show. And you can find it anywhere that you listen to podcasts. Oh, are you talking about the episode on critical race theory?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah, the episode on critical race theory. I think it's episode 2, I believe it is. Episode 2 or 3, so you should be able to just scroll right back. We've done 6, 7, 8 episodes by now, so it's right in that first week of shows. You'll be able to find it pretty easily. And I think it's pretty fascinating. After you watch it, let me know what you think.
Beautiful. LizWheelerShow.com. Thanks, Liz. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
The theme of the show has been rewriting history, and I'm so afraid that the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. is going to be memory hold down, and his entire premise, judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, will go along with him. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. We all know the name Robert Bork, right? We may remember his nomination to the Supreme Court and how that went poorly for the country. One of the books I've read of his is Slouching Towards Gomorrah, and it's a must-read. It's a fantastic book. He wrote another book called The Antitrust Paradox. His son is with us right now because the book is being released again with a new foreword by Senator Lee and by Robert H. Bork Jr. Mr. Bork, how are you, sir?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Great to talk to you. The book, again, The Antitrust Paradox. We don't have nearly enough time to cover this fully, but let's do the best we can. What is antitrust?
Antitrust is the body of law designed originally, way back in the late 1800s, to cover large corporations, trusts as they were then, like Standard Oil and others, and to sort of prescribe what they can do, what they can do in terms of mergers and acquisitions, and that sort of thing. Now that law has been on the books, stays on the books, but went through a very bad period where judges like Justice Brandeis and Justice Douglas really were imposing their own personal views on the law. And they were opposed to anything big. They were thwacking corporations for being big, for the curse of bigness. My father saw this as a young law professor at Yale in the 1960s, having come out of the University of Chicago and the Chicago School of Economics. And he started to write about it. In fact, taught the course at Yale Law School about antitrust. And he was concerned at the time that the socialists, the left, were going to hijack antitrust and turn it into a weapon against capitalism, against the economy, imposing more regulation and more controls. So he started this book in the late 60s, was delayed in finishing it due to his government in the Nixon and Ford administrations, and it was published in 1978. By 1979, the Supreme Court had seen the book cited in a case and adopted his prescription, which was the Consumer Welfare Prescription, now called the Consumer Welfare Standard. And the idea was that the jumble of sort of competing ideas about what antitrust was really could be summed up simply as, is what a corporation does in the consumer interest or in the consumer welfare or not? If it's for the welfare of consumers, then you should let the practice go. If it's not, you should prosecute and enforce the antitrust laws. So that has led to about 40 years or so. I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna say, if it's not in the interest of consumers, who/what would it be in the interest of that would therefore be illegal?
Well, if it's not in the interest of consumers, then maybe it's in the interest of the corporations themselves. If it's in the interest, or it's the interest of a competitor who wants to bring a case against another competitor, so the idea would be that if a company wants to acquire another company, who will be harmed if that happens? If it harms consumers that happens, then you should intervene. The government should intervene. And if it doesn't, then you should let the merger go. This prescription really tended to sort of free up the marketplace for companies to buy and sell, lines of business and that sort of thing. And over the last 40 years, we've had enormous economic growth. We've had enormous innovation. And if you compare that to Europe, which has basically been a stagnant economy for over that same period, and which has a much more interventionist antitrust regime, that's one of the reasons why.
I got 60 seconds. I hate to do this to you. Where would big tech fit in this? Because this may be different for different political allegiances, right? There's kind of conservative, right, against big tech, but maybe for your father's prescription. So how does that all sit?
Well, right now we're in an odd place. The law was working fine, but the left has risen up to weaponize antitrust against big business, and they have found an unlikely ally in a number of Republican senators like Josh Hawley, and others who are upset about what they buy as big tech companies. All that may be true, but it isn't about antitrust. Antitrust is not the vehicle to solve those kinds of problems. And so the battle today in Washington is controlling the urges of both the left and right to hijack antitrust and break up companies for political reasons. And it's just a bad idea. There are other ways to go.
The Antitrust Paradox, go buy that. And while you're there and buying Robert Bork books, go get Slouching Towards Gomorrah as well, because that's fantastic. His son, Robert H. Bork Jr. Mr. Bork, great to talk to you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you for taking the time.
Have a wonderful day. The Antitrust Paradox. All right, Slater, we'll be back tomorrow. Spread the word.